Good morning. This is Gail Christian. I'm sitting in this morning for Angie Harvey. Angie Harvey's out doing some very interesting things. We've got a new project coming, and I'm sure she's going to be here in a week or so to tell you all about it. In the meantime, you've got me for the day, and we've got two guests that I'm very excited about. Imani Rupert-Gordon, the new executive director of NCLR, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and we're going to be talking about what are the legal priorities for the LGBT community in the coming year. And joining her is the songbird from Kansas City, Sweet Baby J, singer, songwriter, composer, and the artistic director for the Palm Springs Women's Jazz Festival. Welcome, ladies. Glad that you are here. Now, this is a part of the show where Angie would usually spend a few minutes trying to motivate you. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you a few things. If I could motivate you, I would. I can hardly motivate myself. But I want to tell you some things that kind of just observations of the things that I've noticed that stuck in my mind as I came into this show. One, I woke up this morning to seeing the police gas, well, not gas, whatever that spray is that they use on people, gas some 9-year-old child who is acting unruly, and saying, you're acting like a child, so I'm going to spray you in the face so you can fall out on the ground and start screaming. Now, this was bad enough, but yesterday I woke up to the police body slamming some 15-year-old black girl onto the concrete at her high school, and she's laying there unconscious. Now, we really, this needs to stop. That's all I'm going to say about this, but this needs to stop. I cannot wake up every morning and continue to see this kind of abuse of Black people. This is totally absurd. And we're going to talk about that later, but that's not the topic for today. I'm not trying to start off depressing you, but I just want to start off telling you some of the things that are on my mind. But Myanmar, I woke up this morning and there was a coup in Myanmar because the candidate who was backed by the army said that the election was rigged and unfair and that he actually won. Have you heard this scenario before? Well, this candidate got 17% of the vote and his opponent got 83% of the vote. But he says that this election was rigged. The government, the army has seized the government of Myanmar. And well, I guess it's glad that it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened here. One final thing before we talk to Imani, and that is QAnon. The woman who is a representative from Georgia, who is a member of QAnon, back in 2019, she posted that there were some lasers shooting fire out of space that burn up the California forest and also scorched a lot of communities and, actually scorched a lot of people. And I was thinking about that because I know that all of what they say, if not most of what they say, is absolutely absurd. But I kind of, I think maybe lasers from space shooting fire, might actually be something that could maybe, help us out in times of peril and concern that we are currently having about a lot of things. But I'm going to stop talking about this and I'm going to talk to she's a longtime LGBTQ activist. She's from Chicago, and she has apparently, looking at her resume, spent a great deal of time on issues of social justice. Imani, how did you get into that field? What made you decide to do this instead of, being a model?
Honestly, I remember when I came out as a queer person and it stood out to me, and someone pulled me to the side once and said, it would be really important that you live your life as an openly queer person, because for a lot of young Black women, they don't see themselves represented in this community. And that really stood out to me because I realized that I hadn't seen myself represented. And I thought, what would it look like for me to live out and unapologetically, and for this to be my life's work? Thinking about leaving the world better than when you got there. And yeah, honestly, I think that's how I ended up doing this. I want to be able to live authentically, and I want other folks to as well.
You pick NCLR.
Ooh, well, I've been a longtime fan of NCLR. My sister actually worked at NCLR before I did, and she was the policy director. And so I started to understand the way that they did their work through the work that she was doing. And I really got a chance to understand that there was this national LGBTQ organization that was really thoughtful around grappling with issues of racial justice and economic justice um, and LGBTQ identity. And that's something that's important because not every organization is interested in looking at these issues intersectionally, but that's the only way that I experience them. And so I've been a longtime fan of NCLR and the folks here. And so when it was after, I remember after Kate left, I've just always been a fan of NCLR, and it was, honestly, I'm just thrilled to be here.
What do you think you bring to the organization as a woman of color?
Oh, that's a great one. You know, so I'm the first Black person to run the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and I think this is something that's important. One of the things I say all the time is that representation it's important, but it's not everything. So it's not just because I'm a Black woman, but I want to acknowledge that there is a perspective that I have because I have a lived experience that this. I don't have to think about how to be intersectional because there are some things that I'm just so used to. And so the way that I'm going to think about something, the way that I'm going to approach something just might have a different perspective. And that's all we can ask for anyone on our team. The reasons that we want folks to have different experiences is so that we can start from a place and then build from that. And so I hope that I'm bringing something that's unique to NCLR for that reason. I'm also the first executive director that hasn't been a lawyer. And so, it's also a priority of mine to make sure that our community reaches all of us. A lot of ways that we talk about cases and the work that we do at NCLR is very specifically through a legal landscape. And when you're not someone that studied that, it can be really confusing. And so one of the things that I try to tell our team is that I'm a normal, smart person and I'm part of our community. So if I don't understand what we're doing, then we're not doing our job well enough. And so being really thoughtful about bringing people with us and making sure that when we need to explain to folks, is this litigation we're doing? This is why this is important for our community. And our community needs to understand that we're doing this for all of us and why we're doing it for all of us. And so I think those are things that I bring to NCLR.
I think that the average person perhaps doesn't realize that NCLR is a public interest law firm that litigates, but that you also offer free services to people who need your help.
Yeah, we do. Anyone that needs help, you can call. You can call, text, send an email, go on social media to our helpline. We can connect you to free and low cost services anywhere in the United States. And so we can always refer you to somewhere. Obviously, there's work that we do as well. And so, yeah, you can contact us absolutely anytime at nclrights.org, and we can help you out.
I'm assuming that you were pleased that last week or whenever it was, that it seems like trans men and women are now back in the military. How much of a victory is that, and what work still needs to be done?
Sure. That is absolutely huge. So this was actually one of our cases, and this was something that's really important. So along with our partners at GLAAD, we were the first to challenge the transgender military ban. And this is important because I think we don't always do the best job of talking about this, but the military is the largest employer in the United States. And so it's not just that this was a cruel and mean and discriminatory ban, which it was, but this is actually an issue of economic justice. This is an issue of healthcare, of access. And so this is something that, we've spent the last few years challenging this because it's obviously discriminatory and we can't let that sort of thing go. But it's so amazing that within, President Biden's first week that he was able to sign an executive order getting rid of this because it just makes our world safer. We have to recognize that anytime someone is facing discrimination based on gender, that that hurts all of us. That means that we are all on shaky ground, and we're closer and closer to being discriminated against based on our genders as well. And so this is something that has been incredibly important, and we're thrilled that it's happened. I mean, we have to do a lot more. I mean, discrimination exists in the LGBTQ community, but this is a huge start. You know, the President Biden has signed, at this point, I think issued 39 orders and like 3 proclamations. So he's been doing a lot to change what it's going to look like for us. And it's important because, it's not, I've heard people saying like, oh, we're getting back to normal. And the thing is, we're not getting back to normal. We have to remember that even, we've gone through a very difficult 4 years, but 4 years ago, back to normal wasn't working for too many of us. And so we're not trying to get back to normal. We are trying to make this world better than it ever has been. And we stand a really good chance of doing that right now.
The whole idea of transgenders in the military brings to mind for those of us of a particular age, when Blacks were not allowed in the military and petitioned the government to enter the military in World War II. And on one hand, that was obviously a victory for the Black community, and obviously everyone's entitled to join the military. But on the other hand, it certainly raises a question of, how good is the military to us? I found that for many Black people, it turned out to be quite an awful experience. They go into the military, they serve, they participate often in the oppression of people of color, and then they're treated very badly while they're there. So I have to, is this a little victory or a big victory, or maybe trans people shouldn't go into the military at all?
No, honestly, this is a huge victory. And I think this is something that's really important. And that is, we experience racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia everywhere. It exists in all of our systems. But it has to be up to the individual to choose where we want to engage. Not that we shouldn't be locked out of things based on our identity, and we're able to choose whatever we want, no matter what it is. If someone wants to be part of the military for whatever reason, trans people certainly experience discrimination, within the military, but trans people also experience discrimination outside as well. And every single person should be able to make the choices that are right for them. And so this is a huge victory because everyone deserves to make that choice. We cannot lock people out of opportunities that they want. That's not something that our country stands for, and not something that we'll stand for.
NCLR seems to be a civil rights organization. You seem to be, in your background, certainly an advocate for civil rights, but often within the LGBT community, when you get down to the local level, outside of the national organizations, you find often organizations that are run by white men who, while they share their common sexuality, they don't necessarily share their politics, and they don't necessarily feel progressive and open to people of color and lesbians.
Yeah, honestly, the way that we have to do our work, it has to be from an intersectional perspective. It has been, as long as there has been a movement, there have been people left out of the movement. And so when we're working with folks that have the most privilege in our communities, that aren't thinking about folks that have less privilege than them, then that's not going to help everyone. But if you have someone that's thinking about, or if your movement is centering the folks that experience the most marginalization, then everyone's lifted up from that. And it doesn't happen the other way around. So, when we are talking about folks that experience discrimination, discrimination based on gender, are living in poverty or are low income, are living in rural parts of the country, experiencing all of these discriminations, and then also looking at an LGBTQ identity, if we center those people, everyone, even the LGBTQ or the gay white men that experience the most amount of privilege in the LGBTQ community will benefit from that. But it doesn't happen the other way around. And so we just have to make sure that our leaders and our movements prioritize looking at the most underrepresented in our groups.
I went to your website, and as I told you, I saw this 40-page manifesto of what you hope to accomplish in the next four years while the liberal Democrats are in office. What are your priorities in terms of legislation? Are there any big lawsuits coming up or cases that are going to be as big or as important as the issue of trans in the military?
Oh, there's a lot of things coming up. So we have a lot on the table right now. One of the big things that's coming up are the role that religious exemptions are going to play. We know that over the summer, the Supreme Court determined that under Title, I'm sorry, my wife is making coffee. Over the summer, the Supreme Court determined that LGBTQ people would be protected under Title VII as part of sex discrimination. This is wonderful news. But the court at the time made it clear that this did not include religious exemptions, and that was a signal that they'd be looking to make decisions about that. And that time has come now. And so one of the big things that's coming is the Fulton case, Fulton versus the city of Philadelphia. And this is where the city of Philadelphia receives government funding to find home placements for children in the foster care system. In order to identify and vet, they contract with dozens of agencies. And this is a super common practice. And Catholic Community Services is one of these agencies. Catholic Community Services discriminates against same-sex couples by refusing to consider them as foster parents. This is, of course, in violation to their contract to the city because the city forbids them to have discrimination based on sexual orientation. And so after learning this, the city didn't renew its contract because Catholic Community or CSS, they weren't adhering to this non-discrimination requirement. But their argument is that the Constitution protects for free exercise of religion. And so right now we're looking at will private agencies be able to receive government funding? And that's something that we're waiting for right now. And that's going to be something that's really big. So broadly, a case about religious exemptions. And then also, and I think this is really important too, you'll hear people talking about the Equality Act. And this is something that's really, really important because we have to remember that there is currently no legislation that protects LGBTQ people from discrimination in everyday public life. And we forget this because in many states, there's protections for LGBTQ people. But this is something that's going to be, will be a really big deal. And it's, if this doesn't happen right now, we're not sure when it would happen again. And so we really want to push for this because we've been looking for legal protections for LGBTQ people, since the movement started, and we have a really good shot of getting it done now. So those are some really big things that are coming up.
Let me back up and ask you about the religious piece again. So, what you're saying is there is nothing in the Jesus exemption that you find valid?
I'm sorry?
Does that make any sense what I'm saying?
No, good.
The fact that certain religious organizations can exempt themselves from following the rules and continuing to discriminate. The instance of foster care, no, we don't, that you were talking about with the Catholics. Is there anything legitimate about religious organizations being exempt from treating LGBTQ people in a fair and equitable manner?
I think it's always going to be a difficult when we're looking at having religious exemptions that actually allow discrimination on people. And so I think that is something that's always going to be a concern. There have always been, freedom of religion is something that is certainly part of our Constitution. And when we're looking at discriminating against folks, that's something else entirely. And that's why this case is actually really, really important.
There was something, I need to look down at my notes to find the word and I'm not seeing it, but I did notice that one of the things you wanted to get rid of this wording that referred to people's birth sex. You know what I'm talking about here? That so that if you are born female or born male, that you have to comply with that original birth sex. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I'm not sure exactly what your question is, but but it is important that folks have an opportunity that their birth certificate represents who they are. And so that is something that we do feel very, very strongly about. And so if someone is assigned a gender at birth, and then later in life they realize that gender is not the gender that is for them, that their birth certificate should certainly match whatever their gender that they know that they are, and that should be something that isn't difficult to take care of.
Oh, okay, yeah, I found it. What I had said that you wanted to strike the word biological sex, but I think you've answered the question. What's happening in the prisons? What are your interests there?
I'm sorry, you cut out. In the
prisons, jail, who's gal?
Yeah. So that is something that that's a big priority of ours as well. So one of our big cases was just making sure that someone was able to get their medically necessary surgeries while they're in jail, and that's something that's really important. We really have to realize that when folks are in prison and incarcerated, that that these folks are of the most underrepresented, and that's something that is a priority of ours at NCLR. So when we're looking at like COVID, for instance, one of the things that we're thinking about with as folks are rolling out the vaccines is how this is affecting folks that are in prison. We know that once people go to prison, they will be more likely to experience poverty. And then once they come out, there are very few support systems that actually help set people up. And so working with folks in prison to make their experience there just more humane is something that's important. But then also, the systems that are locking people up in general. And then once people are coming out, that they're not coming out set up and be, not being set up for success. This is incredibly important because we know that these folks are disproportionately people of color. They're disproportionately LGBTQ people. And so this creates a cycle that continues, like cycles of poverty that and we know that these things are associated with lower, worse health outcomes, that having an experience in prison is actually, it's not just that one experience. It actually feeds into a variety of different things.
It seems like inmates are having problems getting the COVID virus, the COVID vaccine. Is that an interest of yours?
It is, honestly. And when we think about it, think about how we've heard folks rolling out the virus. This is a community that is very much is very susceptible to COVID, but there's not a plan to roll it out the same way. And so, I know that folks that work in prisons are vaccinated, but not actually the folks that are incarcerated. And that is something that's a priority of ours. Early on in the pandemic, one of the things that we did was work with some of our community organizations in the and with the state to get a guidance issued in every courtroom in California, so that we were able to they were able to release about 30% of youth that were in juvenile detention. And the reason is because folks are unable to practice what the CDC is saying to keep folks safe. And it's always a priority. If we can get folks out of these systems, anytime we can get folks out of cages, they're going to have a much better experience and more likely to be successful later on.
I've sort of lost track here. This is my first time doing this show, and I have no idea where I am on the time, but I want to ask you one final question, and that is, what about students? That's another major group that I'm sure that you're interested in.
Yeah, young people everywhere. Our work to end the no promo homo, those so-called no promo homo laws, but we need to have in our schools. We need to have education. We need to talk about LGBTQ people, but we also need to have health education that keeps our community safe. It's important that our Born Perfect program is a program to end conversion therapy, specifically for LGBTQ young people. There are still conversion therapy is not a real thing. It obviously just harms people, and it's obviously of the worst things that can happen to young people and causes so much trauma. And so that's something else that that we're concerned with. And then also just making sure that folks are able to play sports, to use bathrooms that that corresponds with their gender identity. And so folks are able to be successful, to just create a world that makes it so folks are able to be themselves.
I wish this was an hour show and I would talk to you longer. I just have one final comment. And looking at all the things that you hope to accomplish in the next 4 years, it looks as though you're going to have to give up food, water, sex, and sleep. Is that so?
You know, there's a lot to accomplish. But I think we can do both of them.
Fine. Thank you, Imani Rupert-Gordon, Executive Director, NCLI. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
And coming up next is going to be Sweet Baby J, but I want to remind you this program is brought to you by Your Women's Circle. Your Women's Circle is an organization of lesbians interested in connecting and sharing resources. You should visit the website at yourwomencircle.com. Sign up, join. We'd love to have you. And Baby J, I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long in the wings there. But
well, good morning. Good morning. I was enjoying the conversation that you were having with Imani, and I tell you, I think she's my daughter that I may have given up when I don't remember. You know what I mean? It's like I always wanted Angela Mayo.
Angela Mayo, huh?
Yeah. To be my auntie. And so now I want Imani to be my niece or my daughter. I'm so proud of her. And I am comforted to know that she is in that position, that we're going to get some things taken care of.
I just kept talking and I said, this is my first time doing the show. I'm looking out of one eye trying to figure out, what is the time? It seems like we're really talking a long time, but then I was getting more and more interested in what she had to say.
Right.
Baby J, in 1939, Downbeat magazine said that the only thing a woman musician could do was drive the audience out of the club.
And obviously Downbeat, I can't even imagine why they're still in business. It's like,
they redeemed themselves. This year, for the first time in their history, Downbeat magazine named a female musician of the year, Terry Lynn Carrington.
Absolutely. And back in the 70s, they actually named Toshiko Akiyoshi as the best composer and arranger in the early 70s. And so, they had to clean themselves up, make up for that ridiculous statement that they did in 39.
Yeah. It seems like it's pretty tough out there for musicians. The clubs are closed. The festivals are closed. How are people like yourself keeping your head above water?
Well, I'll tell you what we're doing. We're doing just what we're doing now. And so as Palm Springs Women's Jazz Festival, we provide a platform to keep the music flowing. There are online platforms that keep the music flowing. And because, when you're in this kind of a medium and it's all new, there's a learning curve. So you seem like you're more busy than you ever have been, though you have to keep reinventing yourself. And as a Black musician, that has always been the case anyway. You have had to find inroads around the world that we live in and to find a way to make a living. And that's what we do every day.
Well, yeah, I can tell it's very, very tough. I mean,
it is. It's very tough out here for a lot of musicians.
Yeah.
If you, it's very tough for everyone, And speaking from a musician's standpoint, of course it is. It's we are living in unusual times. We are living in. I like to say that imagine that your hand is up against your face and you can't see the lines, and when you pull it back, it becomes very clear. Well, we're living in that history now, that everything is happening around us And we are going to be a part of that. I mean, here you have, first of all, it's Black History Month, and we're celebrating the month that we're given for other children and other people to learn about our culture. But what's happening is that we have the first woman of color vice president ever, this first African-American, South Asian American, daughter of an immigrant. I mean, it's pretty fascinating and fabulous. I would say absolutely fabulous in that celebration that my granddaughter can that when I tell her you're going to be the next president of the United States, it's not just because I'm talking, it's because it's a reality that can happen, because that ceiling has been broken. And so many musicians have broken, so many Black female musicians in particular have broken ceilings, glass ceilings through the past. And I think that's the shoulders that those women are the shoulders that Kamala stands upon. You know what I mean?
See, I think it's sort of interesting is how you decided that you would talk about your little Democratic friends in the middle of our conversation about music.
I know. You know I have to go to that. I pray every day. You know what I mean? And I'm not afraid.
Does Kamala Harris start singing or something I don't know about? Maybe she's singing about Kamala Harris. If she was some group.
You pivot, baby. You pivot.
There was sort of a depressing statistic that said 68% of the musicians were considering giving up their jobs and going to try to see if they can find work at Chick-fil-A or whatever it is called, because
yes, that was a statistic. And let me tell you, have we been here before? Yes, we have. Remember back in the 1940s when women had it has happened throughout the years. It keeps happening since the beginning of music, recorded music, back in the 20s, when Black women in particular had a surge. I mean, it was the white establishment that appropriated their music because it became, because of the phonograph, and it was something that they could make money from. But what happened with that is that they took women from tent shows, right? Big booming voiced women from tent shows, because that was the only voice at that time that was palatable on that medium, that thick piece of vinyl. And so it took women one step removed from slavery and propelled them into the national scene. The same time as the Harlem Renaissance was happening, you had blues singers singing about struggles and pain and moans and groans, playing in everyone's Victrola. And so it was amazing. And that just brought this jazz age forward, right? And then the crash happened and they said, get out of my way, blues singer. I don't want to hear from you ever again. Same thing with the World War II. In the 1940s, well, all the guys had to go to war. And so at that time, women had to step into those shoes and fill those jobs at the club. And so it was women musicians who had studied music all their lives were having the opportunity to play it. And so, and in every forum. So in all of the clubs, the USO clubs, they were going overseas. The places were hopping and women were working, band leaders were working. But after the war, the guys came back and those women had to step out of those shoes. It was considered unpatriotic to hire a female jazz musician when she was taking away a man's job. And so what did those women do? Because they were trained musicians. They couldn't go into the kitchen and put on pearls and do the laundry, and because that's what America wanted to get back to after the war. It was such a bloody, engagement that we wanted this utopia, and we had to create it in advertising. And so women had to look a certain way and be a certain way. And female musicians, in some cases, they said, I can't do that. So I will put on my daddy's suit and my daddy's hat and change my name from Brianna to Brian and go out and get myself a job and continue to work. But women had to take that backseat, women musicians. And there were a few, of course, that broke through that, and which was what Melba Liston, women like that broke through that. Melba Liston was one of the first. She was a trombonist that was absolutely fabulous, that was working with Dizzy Gillespie and those cats back in the day, and stood, and she did one, I think, as her own band leader. But you know, it was a difficult time, but we get through it. So we've been here before, and we will get through this. But it is like for Palm Springs Women's Jazz Festival and platforms like ours that will at least allow for some musicians to have a voice and continue that voice. And, you know, people are still writing in their homes. And I say to all of the musicians out there, hold on, baby, we'll get through this. We've gotten through it in the past, and we'll get through it again. And if you can stay alive, stay alive, stay alive, put a mask on, baby, and stay alive, because we will get through this. Better times are coming.
Baby J, I'd like to speak to you longer, but everybody's waving their arms and hands, and I don't know if we're just going to go dead right here on the air while we talk. Baby J, thank you so much. Baby J, it's Monday, and it's Stormy Monday. Can you take us out of the show singing a few bars of one of my favorite songs?
Well, why not, baby? Let's do that. Well, they call it Stormy Monday. And it's the truth. It is Stormy Monday. But Tuesday's just as bad. What did I say? They call it Stormy Monday. But Tuesday's just as bad. Wednesday's worse. But Thursday's just as bad. Let me ask you something. Is this a half-hour show?
Well,
you gave all my time to Imani, and I was sitting up there. I should have waved my hand and said, "Get the smart heifer off the thing so we can just play. We can play." I love myself some Imani. I love myself some Gail Christian. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I just got excited and said if we weren't out of here in 3 minutes, I would never be coming back. And I take care, Baby J. Thank you for joining us, sweet Baby J. Of you, and that's it for today. Remember your women's circle. You can go to the website, sign up, join, do whatever you want to do. It's been a pleasure joining you for today, and arms are waving, and I got to go. And I'm Gail Christian, sitting in for Angie Harvey. Thank you so much. It's been fun.